our head, Paul Christie.
And for over 12 years, we've worked with executives and entrepreneurs to accelerate change in every aspect of their business.
Because we are in the fastest paced business environment that anyone has ever seen before.
So join us for the Evolve to Win show.
Thanks for tuning in to another Evolve to Win show with Paul and Heather. And today I'm really excited to have with us Tina Ekblad. Welcome, Tina.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh my gosh. Well, Tina is a partner with Morris-Depew, which is a full service civil engineering and planning firm. And before I go on to tell you all of these amazing aspects about Tina's background, which I'm going to dive into, I just want to say, Tina, that I think there are probably people out there who don't really understand what civil engineering is all about. Can you give us like the Reader's Digest version of what it is your firm does?
Sure. So the way that I generally describe it to folks is we do everything on a piece of property except take a building vertical. So if you think of your corner neighborhood pharmacy, the residential subdivision that you live in, even your local hospital, we are involved in the ground level projects, either on new property or redeveloping existing property.
So you do all of the different steps that are required, a lot of government involvement, right?
Yes.
Permitting and hearings and all that to take a property from vacant land to being prepared to build on.
Yes.
So you do everything but the construction.
Exactly.
Is that right? Okay, cool. Now, your expertise, first of all, I am excited that you're a partner in this firm in Southwest Florida. Morris-Depew has been around for how many years now?
It will be 30 next September.
Oh my gosh, it's so amazing.
Yeah.
And as partner, your niche, your forte is as planning director. So I know that as a planning director, you have a separate, very specific piece of the puzzle that doesn't even necessarily require the civil engineering piece, but I don't necessarily understand exactly how that works. So tell me a little bit about what it means to be planning director.
So my job on a day-to-day basis is to basically interpret government policy. I look at the visioning documents that a city or a county has put together along with the regulations, and I try to find the compromise between that and what our client's vision is. Sometimes that client is even the municipality saying, we don't quite like how this turned out. What can we do to make it better?
And is that in part the aesthetics of it? I mean, how much of it is how does this look in the scheme of things within any local area?
So it's interesting that you say, how does it look? Because the look of for example, a subdivision really comes down to the architecture and the landscaping with the existing land pattern, so wetlands or natural resources. And that absolutely can be governed and regulated, but typically it's done after I'm finished with my pieces of the puzzle. So my job is really for example, what do we want Collier County to look like over the next 30 years? Mm-hmm. Are we too much into tourism and we want to attract a different economic engine? If so, we need to be looking at our 30-year vision plan and making adjustments to that. Mm-hmm. Alternatively, if you're driving down the street and you're looking at it going, this is just not good, okay, then we need to be looking at our land development code and the types of plants that are required or how wide the sidewalk is. So yes, from that perspective, those looks are important. But really, it's policy. Mm-hmm. What is that vision? Is it working right now? And if not, what can we bring to the table to get a better perspective and economic growth?
Got it. So like in my brain, when I think about subdivisions as an example, one of the things that was really important for us is that we had the trees, the cypress, like the landscaping here that is some of the traditional Florida landscape. Mm-hmm. And so same builder, two different projects. One was just homes, like it was leveled and it's just homes. And then ours has, some beautiful landscape to it. So I imagine all of that has to do with what was available code-wise, right? And how much protection or conservation had to happen.
It does. One of the things that I always remind people is just because a home was built today doesn't mean it was permitted yesterday. It could have been 10 to 15 years ago. So Florida is a very complex system when it comes to allowing development. And yes, we have properties that allow development that were permitted in the 80s that may not have a building on them until, 6 months from now.
Got it. And it's changed a lot.
Yes, it's changed dramatically.
Toward what end? What would you say in your experience has been some of the biggest changes you've seen recently?
Well, most of my practice right now is in Lee County, and some of it is in Walton County in the Panhandle. And what I would say we're really seeing a shift towards in both locations is, number one, working with private development in a more expedited capacity than was stereotypical in the past.
Okay.
And number two, working with what I would identify as the natural resources of a property to preserve them and use them as the amenity. So what you think of as that natural Florida landscape and integrating that into the residential community in this case. We've done quite a few projects in the last few years where that was probably the number one priority. And I will tell you that amending the governing documents of the municipality to get that finished was a very interesting feat, all the way up to decisions made by the governor. It's been very interesting to be involved and now to see those communities come out of the ground and kind of walk the property and really have that moment of, I can't believe I did this.
Yeah.
So,
okay, I'm going to ask you a question that is so totally off topic, and you might say to me, time out, we're not doing this right now, which is totally fine, and then we'll ask the producer to edit this question out, but let's just go for it anyway. What's going on with our red tide?
Oh, that's not me.
No.
I have some, personal opinions. I am definitely not an expert. What I will tell you is, just like I tell anybody, family, friends, clients, it is a very complex situation. And for any of us to identify one particular business or industry or property owner and say that it is their fault is oversimplifying the situation. We as individual homeowners apply fertilizer to our properties every day in the form of things that we can buy at Home Depot. That does contribute to the problem. There are other industries that contribute to the problem. There are other government improvements that contribute to the problem. And the solution is not easy. It is not going to be quick. And what I would advocate for is something that I advocate across any issue, and that is we have to work together and stop pointing fingers at each other.
Okay, that's the answer. That's the answer I needed. I'm totally with you there. And it's certainly just a confusing issue because of how many people have an interest, how many people have an opinion, and not everybody who has an opinion is an expert. So I agree. Working together is a great way to go. So now let's get into a little bit about who Tina Ekblad is because. Okay, I want to start with how you got into your role as planning director and partner. You went to FGCU, correct?
I did.
Undergrad and master's.
Yes.
And the education that got you where you are, the degrees you got were what?
I have a bachelor's of liberal arts with a concentration in environmental science from FGCU. And then I also have a master's of public administration from FGCU. So I don't want to, color that in any way and say that I use my degree every day because I don't. I'm no longer in the field identifying plants within a wetland.
Right.
And I don't work for a municipality, which is really what the public administration program is for.
Okay.
However, I have done those things in the past, and I think that gives me a different perspective that is valuable every day in my job. I generally understand the language that our environmental consultants use and can generally have a conversation with them about, okay, talk to me about this wetland. We're preserving it. What else do we need to make it viable if, for example, we put in a commercial subdivision? From the flip side, when I get letters and comments from government agency staff, it's actually a little bit easier for me sometimes to read between the lines and understand, okay, they're asking this because of this regulation over here that might not be in local code, but it's in federal statute. And I need to help them. I need to give them a little bit more information so that they have some foundational elements and they can make their decision. Something as simple as public budgeting is not something you think about when you work in the private sector, but it's important. And understanding how that cycle works and what it means for various programming, especially when you're, I used to work a lot in writing grant applications.
Okay.
Well, understanding when those come out, how they get funded, how that works with a municipality's budget, when things get amended. I don't do that every day anymore, but having that background is extremely helpful.
So it's interesting how many different aspects of your background have come together to really help you in the planning world. And even though your degrees maybe were not the traditional degree for the path that you took, every little bit of it really supports that. So to get into the planning in the private sector, was a lot of the training, on-the-job training from the various places, is that really where the bulk of your expertise comes from?
Absolutely. I would say the general descriptor is trial by fire. There were times where I very seriously considered walking away from this industry. And
why?
Because where I started the trial by fire, because we were in a very high point in the economy, the way that I describe it, and I should not, is I was a warm body that got hired. I started absolutely at the bottom of the totem pole, and I was happy to do that. But some of the things that I was given to do, I probably should not have been doing. I didn't have the experience to be handling them. And things were moving so quickly that the quality control of someone checking my work behind me wasn't probably as detailed as it should have been. So
you had a lot of responsibility on your shoulders as a young, newer recruit, warm-bodied recruit into this industry. But what you took on and what you learned from that trial by fire
was huge, and
you're still using today, I'm sure.
Yes, right? And I remind the folks that work for us that are also just coming out of college, just got their degrees, nobody ever dies because of planning. We are not surgeons in an emergency room, so it's okay to make mistakes. However, the flip side to that is ask questions.
Yeah.
So,
well, and quite oftentimes you'll end up with people in your business who are engineering, the people who are experts in the engineering field, and they tend to have a behavioral style where perfection is what comes to mind, right?
Yes.
Is the goal rather than just getting it good enough. And so trying to fight that need for getting it right with the need for moving forward, and because we're in a place right now, I think, from an economy standpoint, where things are really picking up all over the place, right? Since our the little blip we had in the screen, but with things being as busy as they are and how many projects you have coming in, that must be, from a leadership perspective, something that's really incredible to manage.
It is, and it's something that we absolutely struggle with, because so many of us went through that blip. I myself was let go from my job and was unemployed for a period of time. I don't ever want to be in that situation again. I don't ever want to be in a situation where I'm having to let staff go because the financial picture just isn't there. So we're looking at an increase in permitting and in demand, going, okay, how do we responsibly handle this? Do we ask everybody to pitch in a little bit more, or do we hire someone and go with the gut feeling of this is going to last for a while and this is going to be positive? You're really kind of taking a risk here.
Yeah, got it.
So a leap, so to speak.
Yes, for sure. So Tina, you talked a little bit about your degrees that you got from FGCU, but I really want to know, what does musical theater have to do with being a planner? Because I know that's a piece of your background too, which has got to be fairly unique in your industry. How'd you use that piece?
It is. So as a planner, you advocate on behalf of your clients via public hearings, which are what I would describe as an informal courtroom. So you have either a board or a hearing examiner that is hearing the case that makes a recommendation to either a city council or a county commission, and then they hear the case as well. So my background is actually in dancing. I grew up doing ballet, and I fell into musical theater just on a whim.
Okay.
And one of the things I learned was, who's your character? Who are you going to be that day? What's the show? What's the background? Who's the character? And you effectively create another person. You step into that role. And really good actors do it like days, months in advance of whenever they need to, quote unquote, perform. And so many people are constantly asking me, how'd you get so good at public speaking? The answer is acting. And creating that character. The character is the private consultant who is advocating for their client, who doesn't get rattled by random questions, who is confident in the answer. And really, my presentations are like a script. I absolutely script them. People all the time are surprised to hear me say that. But yes, I have talking points, I script them. And from there, you just hope for the best, because you can be cross-examined, you can be asked questions. I am not going to pretend that I have a great poker face, because I don't, but I just try to roll with it from there.
Got it. Well, and as is true to form, you are planning for the planning hearings and
yes.
planning for that cross-examination, which is really, you think about how many different aspects of business you can relate this to, and this whole idea of who's your character, who are you being? I feel like there are so many people who are really skilled technically. They know what to do, and they're great at doing. But how many people have actually really mastered the being part of it? Who are you being as you're doing this great job that you're doing? So I think that is something that truly sets you apart in this world, is the fact that you can pull off that character. But really, it means that you're representing your clients to, just an extra level, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So I want to go back to and talk a little bit about what it is for you that you've been able to develop from a personal leadership perspective that has helped you make it through. Now, you may not know this about Tina, but when she's not doing her planning work at her engineering firm, she's actually usually either swimming, biking, or running. And those three things could only mean one thing, which is you're a triathlete on
Yes,
top
I am.
of it all.
Yes.
And so have you always been athletic? You said you're a dancer, but were you always into running, biking, swimming, that kind of thing?
No, I grew up swimming.
Okay.
Admittedly. We lived in a community that had a very large lake in New Jersey growing up, and so I was on the swim team in the summer. And my grandparents lived in Florida, and so I would spend a lot of time with them in the summer, and they knew I liked to swim, so they would sign me up for lessons and diving to keep me busy, and it just stuck. It was something I've always enjoyed. The way I describe it to people is I have no hand-eye coordination, so team sports were not really an option.
That wasn't going to be your thing, right?
But dancing and swimming and alpine skiing were things that I was very avid about as a kid. And actually, it's funny because you say that planning and triathletes don't go together, but that's actually how I got into triathlon. Is one of the places I worked at, a large majority of the planning department was triathletes.
Really?
And they continued, and a lot of us went our separate ways, and I eventually caught the bug from them. And many of them don't race anymore, but I still do. And I started with, the shortest distance possible, and I really liked it.
Which is a sprint, right?
A sprint,
okay.
yeah.
So a sprint is a 5K,
yeah, so the
10-mile bike.
That's the thing. The
Ish.
sprint isn't as structured, so the swim
it
and
can
the
be
bike
whatever
can
it
totally
is.
vary.
Okay.
But the run's usually a 5K. But I found a women's triathlon team that I joined, which was actually a different effort at the time. It wasn't to get better at triathlon. It was to make friends outside of planning.
Oh, okay. Which is always a good thing, right?
And I did. I made some really great friends that I still hang out with. We still train together.
Okay.
And it was a great experience. And I will admit, I've had some really rough races since that time. But for the most part, I love it. That's the time that I set aside for myself. Mm-hmm. I do a lot of problem solving while you're out there for a couple of hours riding your bike. Mm-hmm. But it's also a great way to spend time with my friends and not be sitting at a restaurant.
Yeah.
You know, be doing something active.
Yeah.
So
I want you to tell me a little bit about what it means to catch the bug for being a triathlete, because I don't have that bug. Maybe I'm not susceptible to it. I don't know. I did one of the minis of the sprint triathlons just to do it, like, you know, check it off and be done. And then you've done the marathon to check it off and be done. But I'm a total one and done girl. And yet I can sort of see, although I'm not a runner, doing the training felt so good. Mm-hmm. Every time I finished, it felt so good to stay up with the training. So there was something really magical about the process that I can kind of see how you could catch that bug. But what is it for you that has you want to do that again and again and again?
So initially it was getting better at it. So biking was absolutely not my thing. And still, if you asked me to rank the sports, biking would be at the bottom.
Really?
But that's one of the things that catching the bug changed. Like, I have invested time and effort and financial resources in getting better at the bike, and seeing that improvement, watching that improvement, it absolutely keeps you going. Going back to the same course year after year and beating your time keeps you going.
Okay, so for you, it's that self competition, right? So you're going after beating your personal best, not necessarily beating the person who's running, swimming, or biking next to you.
And I would say that's the first discipline of triathlon, is you're competing against yourself.
Okay.
The minute you start to compete against somebody else, first of all, every race is different. Even if you go back to the same course, the conditions on the day are different. Mm-hmm. Every person is different. My last race, for me, I will tell my close friends and my coach, it was terrible for me.
Oh, you've just told everyone. I'll
admit that now. It's a couple months in simmering in my brain, but it was terrible. I went into a very dark place and I never dragged myself out. That's something else.
And why?
The how is I neglected all of the things that I had learned. One of the things that works for me ahead of race day is, number one, to prepare. I was absolutely prepared in the training. I could have done that distance day in and day out. I was ready.
And by the way, distance-wise, now we're talking about a half of an Ironman at this point.
70.3 miles, yes.
70.3 miles in one day.
Yes.
Am I right about that? Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know how many of you can actually get your mind around that one, but wow. Okay, so you were prepared for the distance.
Absolutely.
So right now, I'm surprised to hear that you were in this terrible place, but yet you had the planning and you were prepared for the distance, because that would be, I think, most people's absolute worst nightmare. So what on earth?
Physically, I was totally ready to go. I was crushing things in my training that I hadn't seen in months. Mentally, I did not do any of the things that I normally do leading into that race. It was an A race for me. I had a lot of expectations that I wanted to meet for myself. And while I physically could have met them, without the mental side, I just could not put the puzzle together. That's how I describe it. It was so bad, I put my running shoes on the wrong feet. I was so distracted mentally that I took 2 steps and went, this isn't right.
Oh my gosh.
And had to stop, which meant more time.
So, okay, you are going back to proving the point that I can't tell you how many different interviews we've talked about this in different ways. It's okay. So there's the doing part. You were physically ready. You were prepared. You were trained. And then there's the being part, which is the mental part. And this is the part that even if we know better, because you knew better, you knew what to do.
Yep.
You had the knowledge to do what you know you needed to do, but yet you didn't do it.
Nope. I didn't create the character to bring it back to the public hearings and the musical theater. I didn't create the character, and it just fell apart.
And now in retrospect, as you've studied that, do you know why you didn't do it?
Oh, absolutely. I didn't prioritize my time and myself above other things that were demanding my attention at the time.
So think of how many people are suffering from that very, very same issue in all different parts of their lives right now. Too much to do, not enough time to do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to handle everything I need to do for other people first, and then I'll let myself slide.
Yep.
Happens all the time.
And I did it, and it impacted me at the race. And I will fully admit it took me a couple of weeks to put together that I was also doing it at work and at home. So if I'm not creating the character for race day, that also means I'm shoving aside things that I need to do just to feel good and have a productive day at the office and at home.
So it's incredible that you took the time to really gather that insight, because so many people will go through those tough times, but they don't reflect on them to the point where they gain the insight that's really available. So can you give us an example of what you would have done to mentally prepare?
So one of the things I learned at my first triathlon, and that I used like religiously the first year of racing, is to visualize the race.
Okay.
And one of the things that I would share with any triathlete is race early, race often. Don't block your schedule with a bunch of A races. Similar to giving a presentation, you don't ever just walk into a public hearing, right? You might do an introduction at a luncheon, like do some things that don't have that A race pressure associated with them, just to do them and have the experience. So for racing, it's visualizing the start, getting out of the water, shifting gears to the bike, getting on the bike. I know that I battle personal demons on the bike because it's my worst sport. So I have a list of things that I tell myself.
Affirmations, yes?
I always tell myself to adapt up, which is, my version of being better than the last ride. Okay. Keep moving up, keep moving in a positive direction. And then you visualize getting off the bike and transitioning into the run. God bless my husband. He got me into running many years ago, and he taught me how to reset. Halfway through that run, I try to reset and pretend that it's the beginning of the run again, and find that energy and the pep, even when it's a hot, disgusting day and there's not enough ice in the world.
Oh, that's powerful.
So visualizing those things, because that's what training does for you, right? It should teach you not just how to nail the nutrition and hit your paces, but also pulling yourself out of those moments where your brain will inevitably tell you, you can't do this. Well, yes, I can. I need that thing, that trigger, that saying, that reset, that personal thing to me that kind of flips the switch. I didn't do any of that day.
Man, and the thing about all this is your brain, your subconscious mind is so powerful, right? And so you've got this protection mechanism that is your subconscious mind protecting you from this nonsense of a half Ironman, right? And so it's like, you got to stop now, Tina. This is enough. And so you've got to do all this mental preparation to overcome the natural response that we have, which probably is like an amygdala hijack, which is that fight or flight mechanism that shows up where your body's like,
yeah,
we don't really want to do this.
Yeah.
And yet you finished that half Ironman.
I did.
Do you know how many people would just like think it's it would be the biggest accomplishment of a lifetime to even, drag yourself across the line, and yet you left that race feeling like really terrible about it, right?
I will fully admit I was disappointed in my performance because I knew I had so much more in the tank, and I just couldn't spend it.
Wow. So I couldn't help but start making furious notes as you were talking, because I'm just thinking about how every single thing you said applies to who we are in life and business, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so you go back to this concept of race early, race often. I love that, which is really, it's all about planning and practicing. It's not about like just going for the big thing, whatever this is. So if you're in sales and you're going in front of your huge client, that better not be the first time you have shared what you have to share. That better not be your first practice at overcoming the objection that's coming, right?
Right. It's like the elevator pitch, right? You practice that in front of the mirror so that you're ready when it shows up.
Yeah.
Very similar concept.
Yeah, the keynote speech. You should never be giving your keynote speech for the first time in front of the audience who has paid for it, or if you're doing a free speech, even the one who hasn't paid for it.
Right.
And yet, how many people in life do that because they either procrastinate their way through telling themselves the lie that they're going to be just as good if they save it all and just perform it on the day. But what you're suggesting is it's the smaller races. It's getting out there. It's getting that practice. It's building that confidence, right? Mm-hmm. By doing those races.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll admit that's where in talking about the keynote speech, that's where the musical theater really played a role for me. Mm-hmm. I remember doing a show where my role was more backup and support. I was brought into the show with a week before opening curtain because somebody dropped out, and it was like, oh, okay. Thankfully, I didn't have any lines. It was literally like, we need filler. Okay, fine. I was in high school. I was in the arts program anyway. It didn't really matter. Mm-hmm. But then they were like, hey, we need you to say this thing. And I had lines all of a sudden, and it was like, oh, okay. And at that point, you're in dress rehearsal. So you're in the theater with the lights, dealing with all this other stuff. And the first night we were there, after being given these lines with 24 hours notice, I walked out on stage and nothing came out of my mouth. Yeah. It was open, but no sound came out.
You were thinking the words, but they weren't matriculating, huh?
Yeah, and that experience really stuck with me because it was with a playhouse I had never worked with before. So I didn't have the comfort of knowing the director and the choreographer and everybody involved like at some of the other previous shows I had done. Mm-hmm. And so as I got older and I had to make presentations in school, whether it was for college or for work, that stuck with me that, hey, remember when you get in that room with a bunch of people you don't know and the anxiety level hits the roof, mm-hmm. Remember how you stood there and didn't look very prepared? And for me and my personality, that was not okay.
Yeah, I totally get that. So this is why they have the dress rehearsal, right? Is mm-hmm. to get those jitters out and fix the bugs and all of that. Yeah. And my God, it makes so much sense. Now, the other thing, you talked about the visualization and visualizing that race before it's run. Yeah. And you think about this too, is when you're in a place of visualizing, you're actually training your subconscious mind, that this is happening. Your subconscious doesn't know the difference between real or imagined. So if you visualize, you're actually giving yourself what your mind believes is a physical experience. And so if you take that piece away, you're not setting the stage.
Yeah.
That's such a big deal.
Yeah. And I've used it in like really awful races before. Mm-hmm. I remember my first jump from sprint to Olympic distance. So Olympic is a half a mile swim, a 24-mile bike ride, and a 6-mile run. Mm-hmm. It was cold. It was a November race. It was just a cold year. I remember getting into that ocean and I was wearing a wetsuit in Florida. Like, that's how cold it was.
Yeah.
And my coach at the time said to me, when you get out of that water, I want you to pretend that you're at Kona, which is the world championship for the really long distance race that I will never be at. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what? That's just ridiculous. And she was like, I want you to picture that. Mm-hmm. And that was the moment that made me realize how important the visualization that she was repeatedly telling us to do made a difference. Mm-hmm. Because had I not remembered what she said getting out of that water, I would have been so cold between the temperature and the wind. I probably would have been like, screw this, I'm not doing it.
Yeah. Well, I got to believe that took most of the racers down, right? Because when you're so focused on that level of discomfort, you can't possibly be focused on giving your best on the next level, right?
Yeah, we had 2 or 3 girls literally get in the water and get out. Like
they didn't even do the swim.
Nope. We had, there were folks all around us on the bike. Like even the whole bike ride, I was shivering, just trying to think of.
Going, I'm in Kona, I'm in Kona.
Yeah, like palm trees, lava, it's really warm. God, this is awful.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, so I can see how doing that visualization really is a discipline that keeps the focus where it needs to be. Now, there's one other thing that you said that you and I've never talked about before that I think is so powerful, this reset concept that Michael taught you. So in the midst of the race, when you're like just about out of gas and you do a reset as though the race has just begun.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, think about that like first thing that brought me to is tennis. I'm, halfway through the second set and I just do have to push the reset button, of course. Never use that. And I thank you for that. Thank you, Michael. But think about that from a business perspective too. Do you ever use some of these techniques you've talked about in your business, whether it be in your leadership in that firm or just in getting through some of those tough projects that you have?
I'm going to be honest and say I use them without realizing I've used them at this point.
Okay.
So in a hearing, I'll ask, like, can we take a 10-minute break kind of thing? And I'll strategize and try to figure out the issue from the other side. And that for me is the reset. Changing the perspective is the reset. If it's an internal office situation, when it comes to the personalities, I'm always the one to initiate. So yeah, I'll use that reset button all the time. I just don't think folks realize it.
Okay, got it.
Because it's my usually it's my schedule because it's a planning related problem, right? And I'm the project manager. So if I can create the room in the schedule to create the reset, yeah, I'll absolutely use it.
And think about how valuable that is just in the midst of a workday. If you're getting into a tough spot, if you're feeling like you're overly overwhelmed, frustrated, just tired, anything, like if you're losing your level of engagement, just think about hitting that reset button. And when you do, you come at it from a fresh perspective. Like I think the one reset button that most of us have built in is called a vacation. And yet, as I understand it, there are more than 50% of Americans anyway who actually are not taking any or all of their vacation time. Over 50%. So they're not even using what is plugged in as the one reset that we actually should have. So
yeah. And the thing that I would say to that is I think we most commonly associate the reset with a vacation. It doesn't have to be. It can literally, for me, at times in our old location, so Morris-Depew moved their office a little bit earlier this year. So our old location was a 3-story building and nobody was on the 3rd floor. So I used to go up to the 3rd floor and just walk the hallways.
Yeah, total reset.
So that was the other way I would do it. And now I kind of just pace the parking lot and people are like, are you okay? But sometimes I need to just not be sitting in, the beige walls in front of the computer screen. So
for the listeners, be really thinking about what is your mode of resetting? I know I use meditation. And so even right before we got together today, I was in my office in my little meditation chair with my, but for 15 minutes, the value that I get from that of just getting myself centered and focused and relaxed is amazing. Just shutting down the chatter. Yes.
Yeah.
So the one other thing that I want to share about Tina is that she's on top of being just a phenomenal professional female executive in this role of planning and engineering. Is that you're a community leader as well. And, I know that you do work with FGCU, you do work with Leadership Florida, which is part of the Florida Chamber of Commerce. Yes. Yeah. And then what else? You also had is it the Tiger Bay Club?
Yeah, I work with the Southwest Florida Tiger Bay Club. And then on a corporate level, we have picked up Lee County Habitat for Humanity.
Oh, awesome.
So at least twice a year, we try to do a corporate event with them, just so that our employees can see the work that we do on a much smaller level, a local level. And both of the events, they've been able to meet the families, which makes a huge difference in, their motivation for why we do what we do sometimes, and encourages them to give back.
Yeah.
So.
And I want to say a formal congratulations to you for just being one of our most recent recipients of the Gulf Shore Business 40 Under 40. And of course, this podcast is produced in partnership with Gulf Shore Business. As of the conversation we're having right now, we haven't actually been to the event, but by the time it airs, it's official. So congratulations on that.
Thank
It's
you.
a really big deal. And I'm just thrilled for you that you've received that kind of recognition, because you're one of these women who figured out how to do it all, right? And you have this amazing career, and on top of it, you're in the community, you're giving back consistently, and you're a triathlete. Like, I can't say enough to you about like what it's like to really understand the discipline and the self-leadership that it takes to do that type of event. For me, it's just so inspiring. And I wonder, are there any last thoughts that you have that you might want to share about this whole concept of discipline and self-leadership? What would you say to someone else who's thinking about whether it be their next career move, or thinking about maybe trying their first triathlon, but they are scared or nervous or don't think they can do it? Like, what do you say to them?
So first of all, I'm one of those people. There's not a lot that I can say I've done just because I felt like it. I'm definitely an overthinker. And the one thing that if I could, go back and tell my younger self or tell anybody is, number one, just go for it. And number two, don't give up. That sounds very cliche, but what are you really going to lose by trying to race and not finishing? Or trying a race and surprising yourself and finishing in a better time than you thought. Conversely, from the employment perspective, what are you really going to lose by going after that thing that you've been dreaming about for so long? I mean, what if you actually accomplish it?
Yeah.
So
That's awesome. And Tina's given us some things to think about for ways that you can make it happen. So really think about what she talked about with the visualization, with the affirmations. The story that you say to yourself has everything to do with whether or not you believe in you and your ability to accomplish whatever you set out to accomplish. And if all else fails, when you get into it, just hit the reset and pretend like you're starting from scratch, because we all know we have a lot of energy when we start something. It's just that follow through that can sometimes be a grind.
Yeah, just pretend it's the beginning again.
There you go. Well, Tina, it's been so awesome having you on the Evolve to Win show. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Absolutely. And thanks for tuning in. If you haven't yet connected with Tina, you can find her at Morris-Depew.com.
Yes.
We'll include all of her links to LinkedIn and social media and otherwise so that you can connect with her. And if you haven't connected with us yet, please go to heatherchristie.com. You can sign up there for our leadership list and have access to these podcasts that are produced in partnership with Gulf Shore Business. Have an awesome day, everyone.